Hey everybody, my name is Zach. I am your cold boyfriend. I am joined today. Welcome Isabel to the channel. What's going on, Isabel?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
No,
Have you seen any good
no.
movies lately? Have you
I saw
seen
Crimes of the Future.
what? That's right, commenters. Don't be asking. I haven't seen it. One of us has seen it. Izzy's seen it. Isabel, what do you think of Crimes of the Future?
I loved it.
Your thumbs up.
I was saying to you before that my love for Crash has kind of become a meme. So I was trying not to overdo it. I still overdid it because I posted about it every day before it came out. But yeah, I love it. It's fantastic.
Hell
It's
yeah.
really it's really degenerate. It's not really spooky, but it's really degenerate.
Mm. Would you call Crash spooky?
Depends how you mean.
Well, that's right. We're talking about Crash today, everybody. 1995, right?
Six.
See, I fucking closed out the window. You
It,
guys, I'm a fucking poser, dude. I gotta
your two
go.
favorite your two favorite things that came into existence in 1996, me and
Scream.
Crash.
Oh, oh no. Wait, the craft.
The
It was a,
Craft, yeah.
it was a good year. Um, okay. So Crash. Have you read the book?
Yes.
How's the book?
It's extremely good. I actually really like JG Ballard. I got into him originally because of the movie. I didn't read this for a while. I read this earlier this year. I read The Drowned World, which is an early one, sort of like a like a eco disaster future Fitzcarraldo. And then I picked up Day of Creation, but I haven't read it yet. And I read Crash. I quite like Ballard.
Nice. I haven't read any, mostly because I'm illiterate. So I'll
No,
check
that's
him out
fine.
one day when I learn how to read. But okay,
If you've seen the movie Crash, that's kind of what he's like. That's all the time.
James Spader, really good. Well, who wasn't really good in this movie though? I don't even know where you'd want to attack it from. I guess this was an Isabel pick. Why did you pick this movie?
Because it's one of my favorite movies. It's actually one of my top five movies, probably. I kind of hit that point in my life where I was like, I feel like all the stuff that's really going to be like foundational to my life has like come and gone. You know what I mean? And like from now on, everything I watch is just going to be like cool new stuff I see. But the stuff that's like affected me in a profound way as was all the stuff I watched when I was like 18. Then I watched Crash like a year and a half ago, and I haven't shut up about it since. It was
Oh
one of
man,
those things like I saw it and I was like, yeah, that was really cool. And then I kept watching it, and then I read the book, and then I
what's one
talk
of the
about it every
qualities
day.
that you really like about it? What's one of those?
Oh my god, it. I funny enough, it actually sparked me actually taking Cronenberg seriously because I used to be kind of middle of the road on Cronenberg. Um,
Mm,
and I realized that Crash is what he was working towards for like most of the 80s and 90s. And then his style since Crash has just been that he realized he kind of hit the finish line. And so he decided he can
yeah.
do whatever the fuck he wants now. So
Does
that's why
feel
I feel
like
like,
it's a it does feel like it's like a period, right? On like a sentence
yeah,
that went through the
yeah,
80s and mid 90s. It does feel like if you compare the director of Crash to Scanners, we are looking at like completely not
yeah,
completely different people, but like matured ones, a far more
yeah.
articulate director who's like not afraid to also be incoherent, like deliberately. So Crash is kind of like it's a very impressive film. If anyone's wondering what my favorite Cronenberg is, I think it's probably like Dead Ringers. Um, or and it's not earned, but I love Eastern Promises. I don't know why, but like every
I
time
actually have a
I
friend who capes for Eastern Promises very hard. It's one of the few I haven't seen yet, but I want to.
I every time I think back on it, while I don't think it's like pure Cronenberg, I think it's purely enjoyable and interesting. But Dead Ringers, I think, is a great pure Cronenberg kind of film.
I actually think of Dead Ringers a lot. One, because I love it. I actually, fun story, I watched it in a doctor's office.
Yeah,
Dead
that's
because
the doctor
I
should
work
not.
oh, because I work at one, but it was a July
Oh,
4th thing. It was a July 4th, and so we were supposed to be there, but there was no actual doctor and no schedule, and no one walked in and no one called us. So we just watched Dead Ringers on
that's
a tablet.
brilliant. It's a
But
fascinating film.
I think about it a lot, mostly because I realized, and I'm borrowing this from a friend of mine, but like Cronenberg is kind of a master of the basics, like especially like shot reverse shot, and you get that a lot from his more talky like 80s movies. Most like
Mhm.
The Fly and Dead Ringers, and then even up to like Cosmopolis, you get that a lot. Like he really like it's almost Spartan. But I find it most interesting to compare Dead Ringers to Crash because they're clearly the same director, but there's this huge jump in style that's hard to put a finger on. Because basically, like in Dead Ringers, it feels like they're made by the same director with the same sensibilities, but everything in Dead Ringers is still structured around like scenes
Mhm.
and like conversations and plots and like resolutions and like arcs in a way that's really exceptionally done. But it's still like in that realm. Whereas with Crash, there's like no scenes almost. Like there's some scenes, but then scenes just peter out and disappear. Or
Mm.
like arcs are just left unresolved. Characters are introduced and then kind of just fade out of the movie after seeming like they were the core of the movie. Like
Um,
Holly Hunter's character is like integral to the kickoff of the movie, and then she's almost forgotten until she becomes the send off of the movie. It's this weird, very fluid montage I find fascinating. Like it's just operating on like feeling and vibes more than anything else, and I find that so interesting because I feel like he was working up to it for a long time, like kind of the audacity to do that, if that makes sense. Like he
oh, it
was
makes sense.
with every successive film, he was like testing his what he can get away with more and more. You get that a lot with like The Brood and
There's
The
something like
Fly.
with Cronenberg, I don't usually use. I almost think of him as like a detached kind of filmmaker. But
I agree.
with Crash though, it's like it's so sensitive in a way that is like super truthful, and the idea that it's not a beautiful sensitivity, and the idea that it's kind of like a perverse or no or like a suicide drive like sensitivity. Like
I
it's yeah.
I have to say, like one of my best friends and I both watch Crash as like a when I'm depressed movie, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Like it's a movie that comes across my mind a lot when I'm depressed, which is funny because I think of it as both like oddly optimistic and then utterly like suicidal at the same
Right.
time. It's kind of both.
This has to be you who through one of our many conversations, have you ever likened this movie to La Notte? Because if you did, then I appreciate
Yes,
it.
actually,
Yeah, I would
well,
agree.
I don't know if I did it on here, but I have elsewhere compared it to Antonioni, mostly because when I first got into this movie, it was actually around the same time I had my Antonioni renaissance because I used to hate Antonioni, and then I like a year and a half ago I had an epiphany and I suddenly loved
I
him
love
again.
Antonioni.
And I think of like when I think of like depression I've experienced in my life, like the two things I think of most are like Crash and then Monica Vitti.
Yes.
So I reference her often in my own writing. I reference Monica Vitti as like this archetype of just this kind of emptiness under existence that I find fascinating. And I think somewhere I mentioned in regards to Crash, I said something to the effect of it's like watching that repressed like depression in Monica Vitti just like fucking explode. Like she finally just hits her breaking point. And this is the result of like what happens like after Red Desert when she finally just snaps.
Yeah.
Is kind of what this feels like to me. So I do think it's a lot like La Notte. I think you could also compare it to that in like the framing. it's extremely like angular. There's all obviously a lot of bodies placed against like
Oh,
architecture and
I almost felt it in like even the like it'd be I wouldn't be shocked if Cronenberg wasn't very familiar with Lenote. Like the structure of the
yeah.
film feels like Lenote. Marcello and Jean Moreau feel just like
Mhm.
James Spader and Deborah Kara Unger. Monica Vitti feels like Holly Hunter, or at her best, Elias Koteas. Like she feels like this kind of like it feels like that repression, like you said, liberated, but since it's under Cronenberg's control and within
Yeah.
his hypersensitivity, it is um well, I guess like you'd have to objectively say that suicide is terrible, but I
Yeah.
think in Crash it's not.
Yeah. One thing before we move to that, because I have a lot of thoughts on that, is I also think a lot of La Ventura, mostly because of what I mentioned about like plot threads just kind of petering out and disappearing,
Yeah.
only to
I
come back later. But
I
on
think
that,
the ending
yeah,
is even a lot like Lenote though. The ending, like
100%,
yeah.
1000%. It's so much like it. Um, and God, I've consumed so much writing on this text, but it's basically like this weird like Freudian nightmare where it's
Mhm.
like I think mostly of like Freud, and I think of mostly like this is kind of a deep cut, but like accelerationist politics when I watch this movie, because it's this weird like they keep like re-instigating this traumatic event for themselves over and over and over again to kind of exert some control over it, but then they keep saying the next one is going to be the one, and it just obviously never ends. There's no actual end goal
Right.
here other than their own death, which Elias Codius probably gets the happiest ending here of anybody, just because
Yeah.
he actually gets what he wants, whereas like the rest of them are just in limbo for the rest of their lives. So on that level, I find this like profoundly depressing, because they're just kind of like torturing themselves until they finally die. But I also find it oddly like optimistic in that the whole driving force of what they're doing is that they feel utterly dissatisfied with their existence. And a lot of that is stuff that's very like artificial, like the whole everybody spends their whole lives in cars, you know, like I spend an hour of my day at least in a car because of my commute to work. And they also set a bunch of the movie and the book in airports and airport garages. So it's all these points of transit that people are constantly like connected to machines, and they're
Mm.
so reliant on them that it's changing them. This is actually interesting with Crimes of the Future, because Crimes of the Future, the whole premise is that the human body is evolving, and it's there's like this debate throughout the movie about whether they should embrace that evolution or reject it, because are you rejecting because you have like more power over your body and you can control who you are, or is this just a natural process? But in Crash it's a very unnatural process, because you know there's nothing in genetic code that says, you know, automobiles. That's like a man-made thing, where
Yeah.
it's so it's like they're being changed by machines, and they choose to just kind of embrace that aspect to
Yeah.
existence in order to like explode just this boredom they have with existing. They
Exactly.
feel utterly dissatisfied.
Like I view it in a large way of what I would call probably like a horrifically reasonable pornographic reaction to the ultra
Yeah,
modern world. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. It Because again, like the whole thing in Red Desert is that like there's no real justification for why she feels the way she does.
Hmm.
They give like they try to argue that it's the a car accident that
Yeah,
she has
yeah.
in Red Desert. They try to tell you that it's that, but then as the movie goes on, you find out that she triggered the car crash, like she did it on purpose because of how she's feeling. It wasn't the cause of how she's feeling, it preceded her feeling, or her feeling preceded the accident. And so I feel like you watch Crash and it's just that exact same thing. It's just people that just kind of hit that point where they feel this need to make some change, or like confront this thing that is happening to the world, like that people are being transformed by machines,
Exactly.
by like structure.
And Cronenberg like expresses this wonderfully, mostly through most of what Elias Koteas says.
Yeah,
It's
the
like
transformation of the body by modern technology.
exactly, yeah, and then this,
Yeah.
like, pornographic reaction to ultramodernism is, like it's a place beyond philosophy or psychology, like, we have to think of Freud when we think of Cronenberg, mostly because that's the filmic vocabulary that he always uses, but Elias goes out of his way to be like, This is beyond art. James Dean died in a car. This is beyond philosophy. Albert Camus died in a car crash." Like, he talks about it as if it's this grand defeatist thing or almost like a psychosexual punishment, right? For being, like you've been saying, kind of complacent, um,
Yeah,
in the
going
world.
off of that,
Yeah.
or I was gonna say going off of that because it's so like hard to define, and I think like the hallmark of like this and Antonioni is that there's just you can't really define what this problem is. It's just this thing that
But the thing
is
is with
that
Antonioni, like, you can trust Vidi as an anchor,
yeah.
as something to invest your feelings in. Who could you possibly do that with in Crash? There's no safe
Well,
entry.
that's what I was gonna say because the whole thing is that he offers that explanation. He sells James Spader, whose name is Ballard, in the
Mhm.
movie. Ballard, he gives Ballard his like faux philosophy. He shows him his notes and his photographs of victims, and he says it's the transformation of the body by modern technology. It's the project. But then in the movie, he's like, "That was just a red herring. I don't actually believe that." And you realize like he doesn't actually know what he believes. He doesn't actually have any answers about what's happening. He's just
Yeah.
going down this road and seeing where it takes him, which I think is really interesting. But
May
yeah,
feel it may feel
what's
completely absurd, but I think that that we're on the money with the like, it's a horrifically reasonable pornographic reaction. That's
yeah.
exactly what it has to be, and I think that Cronenberg, succeeds in hot wiring his audience, if I could be as punny as I can.
I gotta say I have never in my life been more attracted to a man than I was to Elias Koteas in this movie.
Oh my god,
Which is so funny to me because I only knew him prior for The Thin Red Line, where I'm like, "Oh, I love his character in The Thin Red Line. Such a sympathetic, endearing, like, really kind
right?
character." And then I watch this, I'm like, "Oh, man, this guy's a freak." I was
When
like,
I
"Holy."
first saw Crash, I only knew him as Casey Jones from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so it was even weirder. But
The
okay, but on that thought, like, I was like, and I was invincible. I was like, I was immune to Cronenberg's like pornographic charms until he put Rosanna Arquette in leg braces and had her like and then
I've
get
tried to explain that scene to people so many times, and they're like, "Wait, so is it an open wound?" And I'm like, "Well, no, not exactly." But he
I
fucks it
found it
anyway.
it was so erotic. It took over an hour, but Cronenberg got me. He implicated me in the pornographic reaction to ultramodernism, and I fell hook, line, and sinker for Rosanna Arquette in that scene. I'm like, "Fuck you, Dave, you did it."
the
Finally did it.
throughout the book, the whole thing is that a large portion of the book revolves around Ballard, the character, having this really intense attraction to Vaughn, which he finds curious because he says early on in the book that he only had like a couple gay experiments in college, but he realized he's not gay. And then he's like, he sees Vaughn and he has this like unparalleled like sexual attraction to him that he's never felt for anything or anyone in his life, and it only happens when he's in a car. And this is like
Wow.
so much of the book, and of course it just like in the movie eventually it's consummated and the aftermath of that is that Vaughn tries to kill him. But so which make of that what you will, but yeah, it's really it's strange because even in the book the book and the movie both get this really well, which is like how cold and clinical everything feels, and yet at
Yes.
the same time it's, like, so intensely erotic.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like, sensitive too. Because even if I wasn't, like,
Yeah.
implicated, even if I myself wasn't, like, turned on by most of the movie, it's so like, these are people who have sensitivities just by seeing, like, a car with slight rear end damage, right?
Yeah.
It's so sensitive to, like, the hypersensitivities of the world, like, you'll never no amount. But it is very cold and is very clinical, which makes their pornographic reactions to these automobiles so much more affecting because it's your only emotional anchor, you know? Like, we
Yeah.
don't have a Monica Vitti, but we have this kind of intangible, attraction to cars and specifically, I think, death.
In the book, they do this weird reversal where anytime he's talking about like the human body, they use purely medical terminology. So like he's like, I touched her labia, like shit like that. Like he uses purely like medical terminology. But then when they're talking about the cars, it's the most like organic language you can possibly imagine, where they're describing cars as if they're people. It's really interesting,
It's like,
because like, and I think that he gets that in the movie because the bodies are also monotone. Like the expressions on people's faces are so cold and monotone, and kind of you can't really figure out what's they're actually thinking. You can't tell. So much of the movie is just shots of James Spader, but you don't actually know most of the time what he feels about things. But then every time they show a car, it's like this long, loving shot that like goes
yes.
around the curvature of the machine. It's so fascinating to me how he
Honestly,
translated that.
if you took shots from this movie, like not the sexual ones, but like you inserted like the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift music over it,
Yeah,
like they both sexualize cars in the same kind of way,
yeah,
which I think
yeah.
like Fast and
It's on
Furious might be worth
purpose.
a look. Exactly.
I love Fast and Furious 1. It's the only one I've seen.
Well, I mean that and I
I think it's
okay, so
really
Fast
dumb and
and Furious is
awesome.
trying to sell you on the product of a lifestyle and on those specific cars involved. What is Cronenberg? I don't know, maybe sell is the wrong motive, but what exactly is he trying to like convey here? And do you think he finds it like undeniable?
I
Or it,
I I've kind of come to realize that with Cronenberg as like part of this project of the past year of my life that I've watched him way too much, is that like none of his all of his movies always have like a surface like thesis that is not actually what he's interested in any way, shape, or form. That is
Mhm,
kind of what I've gathered. The big one being like probably an easy one being like Existenz, where the surface text is that it's like, video games and what's going to be the difference between virtual reality and reality, how will we tell the difference, and how are we going to know the difference? And the more I watch it, the more I realize his actual concern with that movie is that, was there ever a difference anyway?
right.
Is kind of the thesis of that movie. And like Dead Ringers obviously is like surface level, kind of like an addiction narrative, but then the more you watch it, the more you realize it's almost barely interested in the addiction part of it. It's more this codependent relationship between
Mhm.
people, and like the way they abuse other people and manipulate them. So with Crash, it's hard to say, but with Crash, I feel like I know the original intent of the novel, and knowing Cronenberg, I'm sure he agrees with it because he's usually like that. And I've heard him talk about the movie a little bit, is that it's mostly a parable about being
Mhm.
cognizant of how technology is changing us.
Right.
So on that level, I assume both of them are critical of, I'll call them the cult in this movie. The group, the gang, the gang gets off in a car. But the when you're actually watching it, I feel like it's so overwhelmingly sympathetic to them, and
Yes.
not just to what they're feeling, but even like what they're actually trying to achieve. Because you can say like obviously, and for the folks at home, I'm not saying you should kill someone in a car. I've had to make this clear many times because I think this movie is like mostly allegorical. But like like do you expect them to go back to how they were before? Like,
No,
how could
no,
they do
that's why
that?
I use the word undeniable there
Yeah,
because I think that while they are really sensitive to the ultra modern machines and things like that, I do think it is still cold and clinical in the idea that this is an effect. This is a reasonable pornographic reaction to being around these things and to having your life determined by these things and changed
yeah,
inordinately by them. And I feel like the film itself is around this group of people, and not only sympathizes, it almost acts like they're awake in a world that's asleep. Like they
yeah,
know something the rest of us don't because they've
yeah.
experienced something so visceral that we could only imagine.
I it actually, going back to Ballard instead of Cronenberg, that the other one I read, The Drowned World, it's one of his early novels. It's basically about how like 100 years in the future, the sun got really hot, and the sun got so hot that the ice caps melted, and the world became mostly flooded. And it also became like insanely hot to the point that you can only really live comfortably in like the Arctic. And But scientists go down to where civilization used to be, and they conduct tests there until eventually it gets too hot that they just have to leave. And so at the beginning they're in London, except London is like buried in water, and like they're completely drowned, and iguanas have taken over the earth. And At the beginning the crew says, all right, it's we gotta go, like it's too hot here now, we have to leave. And the main characters just decides to stay, and he has like no rational reason for it, but his girlfriend is staying there, or like this girl he has like an on and off again thing with, because she can't imagine life outside of it. And he just decides he wants to just keep going further south to see what happens. And he just wants to like go into this thing that is almost certainly going to kill him within like weeks, and he just wants to do it. He has this like obsessive, intense, like almost religious need to do this, to like go down south and let what happens happen. And I think it's very similar here in Crash, because the whole thing
Yeah.
is that they're like, this is gonna happen, I just have to do it. Like I have to follow it on its course, which is interesting because it's almost like a predestination thing. Like they're just following natural evolution, like Crimes of the Future, except it's not natural. But they're like,
Yeah.
it's not going to go away. And so they just embrace like this kind of perverted evolution. They just accept it wholeheartedly.
Oh
um
yeah.
it's it's super weird, it's super weird because in that way like Crimes of the Future is almost like less radical, because at least Crimes is just like, yeah, we might evolve to like eat plastic, but like at least I can imagine the body doing that. But like this is about like, what if I could stick my dick in a the tank for my gas tank,
Well,
you
it's
know?
really
Like,
interesting. Like, I like that you said religious because Elias Codius is definitely giving sermons.
oh
But
yeah, this is a deeply, I think,
mm,
religious minded film.
oh yeah, but even if we apply Freudian language to the film, which Cronenberg is definitely like a pupil of, like cars are weird in Freudian dream logic. Like
Yeah,
Freud would be like any sort of compartment, right, is not a dick. It's actually a vagina. Like it's actually
yeah.
like a womb. So like is a car a compartment since you're inside of it? Are you being reborn again after a crash or by actually like going in transit? Or is crashing it making it a phallic instrument since it's attacking something?
Yeah.
Like you get into all these weird little like wormhole Freudian areas with it too. And I'm sure Cronenberg understood that. But it's definitely like this religious connection to it, this psychosexual drive to self-annihilation. Like do you just like crave self-destruction when all of your needs seem to have been met, or like when when machinery seems to make more of an impact on everything than you do? Like what is it then? What is that psychosexual
Mhm.
drive to self-destruction that tends to be hyper fixated on when it comes to ultra modern world or our relationship with machines? Right?
Mhm.
What is that? I don't know what that is yet. We'll figure it out.
Mhm. No,
I'm
I
sure.
agree. I agree, and for what it's worth, he made a Freud movie.
He did, and and he made Young such a fucking perv in it, didn't he?
He made him an asshole too. I don't know, this isn't really a spoiler because it's like a thing that historically happened, but my favorite part of the movie is that at the end you get your nice little fade to black, and it's just like, what's it, who's the actress in it?
Keira Knightley, yeah.
Keira Knightley. It's like Keira Knightley's character was rounded up with her daughters, and they were all shot by the Nazis. And then it's
Yeah.
like Freud's health deteriorated until he basically just died horribly and in pain. It's like Jung outlived both his wife and his mistress, and then
And he
died
put
comfortably in his mansion at the age of whatever. It's my favorite joke in the whole movie. It's really
he put
good.
out a
Like
coloring book called The Red Book. And like
it's
it's
uh,
oh
and actually in that movie the whole thing is like this, um this kind of dialogue about like Freud believes that there's like an observable like connection between like what you see and what caused it. Like there's a cause and effect, and it's like you can like break that down to a science. Whereas Jung is like, sometimes you just have a feeling a door is going to open and then it opens. How do you make sense of that? And so
Yeah.
it's really
I mean, I don't
this,
know. I
yeah.
would die happy if Michael Fassbender were to spank me. So
It's really
there's
funny
that.
because that happens after they're like, we're going to be normal. And then it cuts
Yeah.
immediately to him hitting her with a belt. Um,
Oh no. But okay, so far as like getting back to Crash, James Spader was phenomenal in the film.
I love him. I treasure him in this movie.
Phenomenal. Like, and it made me realize that I'd never actually seen a poor James Spader performance, even in a bad movie. Like
Hmm.
he's always there's always like an interiority to the character that you want to approach more, even in Pretty in Pink, even when he's just a fucking asshole. He has this interiority. I wouldn't call it, maybe it is an intellectual interiority, but it stems from like his sex. Like he is a sexy guy, and
This
and
is
yeah,
my favorite
go
thing
on.
about Cronenberg is that his leads are always someone who looks kind of like a freak,
Hmm.
but is also strangely attractive.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of his, he always picks people with like really angular faces or really like pronounced features. Like
Oh,
James
and
Spader has these weird like buggy eyes, and
hmm,
he's got like
but he
his
has
weird hair,
this
and but
dark
he's like,
intensity, dude. This dark intensity he's always had, and like it's this.
it's all the characters in this kind of have this face where they have this just resting despair face that looks like they are trying desperately to like grab at something that's like just outside of reach at like every second of their life. Like every shot, like in the beginning of him at the hospital after his first crash, he's just like staring, and then he does his like rear window routine
Yeah.
outside the on the balcony, and he's like trying to grasp something and he's not quite getting it. And this
Exactly, and
happens to the very
I mean,
end.
that's his humanity, right? He's trying to
Yeah,
grasp. And like there's something just so mysterious about him and so sexy. And if you thought that his wife would be any more like available or any less sexy, you'd be wrong. She's even more fucking unavailable to us as audience members, but she's
oh
just as
yeah.
attractive and just as like there's an interiority there, but fuck, you'll have a better time trying to whittle it out of James Spader than her. She's
She
impossible to read.
yeah, I've noticed the more I watch it that she's sort of the most ambiguous character in the movie.
Oh yeah.
It's really
Like, is she the
strange
most
because
visceral? Because I feel like she is the most visceral. I feel like she gets the
it's
most pleasure out of the experience or even out of the
it's
imagined ones. Like, it's crazy.
it's a mix of that, but also the fact that she somehow, despite seeming to enjoy it more than anyone else, feels more doubt about it than anyone else at the same
Right.
time. And so she has this weird mix of like, you don't know if she's fully committed, but then when she does commit, she's more in than anyone else in this
Right.
whole movie. Um, you
I
get a
think
bit
she's
of
the only
that,
one who
and
like approaches it as a kink at first before taking it as a religion.
yeah, I agree because that's kind of how she's characterized in the book, is that she has this like ongoing subdom thing with her secretary.
Mhm.
And she at first seems like deeply afraid of Vaughn, but then obviously she has sex with him later. And she like both seems very hesitant to partake in all this, but then she seems just as drawn into the world as
But
James
yeah,
Spader is. So she
she's like a supportive. She almost knows that he wants to fuck Elias Koteas before he
oh, she
does.
knows
Like,
before he does,
and she's
100%.
supportive of it. She's like describing Vaughn to him while they're fucking at one point, and like she's into it, and he gets more because he's disconnecting from the act until he can think
Yeah,
about Vaughn, especially
yeah,
with her narration, which is
yeah.
so detached and unavailable, yet it's for the passion of the moment. It's so weird. Holly Hunter is a lot more available. That might be down
Yeah,
to Holly
it's kind of
Hunter is
easy to
also a
read her
very emotive
character.
actress. Yeah. She's also a very emotive actress. I can't think of a single film where she's not like, you know exactly what she's thinking. And you mostly do with Crash as well. She's thinking insane shit, but you know, like you're
Yeah,
pretty
you get
comfortable
the
with her.
impression she was just kind of unhappy with her marriage, and then so James Spader did it, and she was playing the role of someone that should be upset about it, but then she realized she's kind of just not. upset at all, and she is pretty happy about the
I
state of affairs, and she just kind of goes along with it.
I do remember trying to show this, to one of my friends, I think in high school, and, like, it was already crazy, but when James Spader crashes into her and, like, they
And
stare at
she
each
like
other and she,
rips
like,
over.
he was like, I'm done. Look, we gotta do something else. This is I can already tell it's going to be weird." But, Holly Hunter, I think this was so far as anybody in the cast, it was probably pretty out there for James Spader to do it, but Holly Hunter, though, like, it's still crazy having this
Yeah,
right in between Incredibles and Incredibles 2, like, it is wild that this woman was so, I think she is a great actor, and I wish she would do
yeah.
more on-camera work. She's very good in the
I mean,
film, but, like,
this
it's
was
a
an enormous risk for everybody involved. I
not for Elias. Elias is a psychopath,
fair
and
enough,
Rosanna
but I mean,
Arquette, no risk for Rosanna.
you have to imagine though that like they were filming this as like the showgirls shitstorm was going on. So
Right.
they might have been like looking at Elizabeth Berkley and going, "Oh shit, like that's gonna be me in about a couple weeks."
But
Uh,
for some reason, I feel like Arquette was like, "Excellent, I want that to be me in a few
yeah, yeah,
weeks."
no, no, absolutely. She's got that like Ethan Hawke energy where she's just like,
Oh my
"All right,
god, like
let's go."
and I just
Uh,
got a this thirst post very quickly. Man, few women have been hotter in more horrific circumstances than her. Jesus, I never thought I would be into stupid like, my god, David, you're you got an eye for the
it,
weird, dude. But
it's
she was
it's funny
great.
because
She must have been riding
I
off of that Pulp Fiction success, or like her few moments in that film got her indie cred for the rest of her life. But she was beautiful here and she nailed it and she she definitely knew the assignment. So,
I I was watching The Mangler, the Toby Hooper movie
mm.
yesterday, and when Robert Englund like caked in makeup comes out with leg braces, I was just like, ooh. I
Yeah,
was like,
right?
I felt a little tickle, and I was like, I shouldn't feel that about old Rob Englund and crutches, but I do because it makes me think of Arquette
I
in
think I
Crash.
yeah, and you realize how helpless these people are when you meet, is his name Colin? Who
Oh, are you
Vaughn's
talking about
driver.
Redgrave?
Yes, Seagrave, yeah.
Seagrave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vaughn's driver is, like, hard that's where we get into ideas of addiction for me, because I don't even know if he derives any sort of
He
like,
comes
we
off
don't
just
see
like kind of an idiot, like
yeah,
a passive
and
a
he
passive participant.
"You went and did it without me, the James Mansfield, I gotta
I
have
was
big
gonna say
tits."
one of my favorite lines. You did the James Mansfield without me,
It's
and he
how
sounds so
helpless it
hurt
is.
about it, but then he immediately starts taking pictures to preserve it.
So, like, is that character liberated, or was that, like, a failed attempt? Like, was
It's
that, like, a
it's
is
it's
pleasure derived from almost dying or from dying?
it it's curious to me because Seagrave and Vaughn meet the same end, but Seagrave's death seems like so utterly pathetic, whereas
Yeah.
and accidental, whereas Vaughn seems kind of Byronic and exactly what he wanted. You
Mhm.
know, like his blaze of glory. It actually makes a little more sense in the book because in the book they allude to this, I think, in the movie, but it's way harder leaned into in the book, which is that Bond has this hyper fixation on the actress Elizabeth Taylor, and
Okay.
he is his dream project is to get in a car accident with her where they both die, and he stalks her for weeks because she's
That's
shooting a
cool.
commercial.
I wish that was
Yeah,
there.
she's shooting a commercial, or she's in talks to possibly shoot a commercial at the TV lot that Ballard works at. And that's Vaughn's in is Vaughn uses Ballard. That's why they become connected is he wants to use Ballard to get to her. But then it becomes obvious that she's not going to do the commercial and she's leaving. And he just doesn't tell Vaughn because he can't like
That's
break that
really
to him.
interesting.
And he that is who he hits at the end. Vaughn crashes into Elizabeth Taylor and he dies, but she lives.
So
She
does
she
Vaughn
survives the experience.
because like
And this
if
isn't a spoiler because this is like literally the first page of the book is Vaughn died today or something like that. Like Vaughn crashed into Elizabeth Taylor. She lived, he died. It was a big spectacle, but it was exactly what he wanted. It was this,
since
blaze of glory.
yeah,
This,
and he's really into reenactments even in the Cronenberg film of
yeah,
these
that's the main
superstar deaths. Does,
allusion
does
to
he
it.
see something filmic about it? Does he see something that like that
100%.
is
I think so.
yeah, that's so cool.
100% I think so. They're more, they talk more about film culture in the book. They make it clear that Ballard is a, like, he works on TV shows, not like actual feature films. So it's sort of like this vulgar version of it where they feel like they're in the movies, but it's actually like, they're fucking in like TV stations and airports and such. So they're kind of like always like on the cusp of like this world but not really part of it. And they talk about it a bit. The general plot is basically exactly the same, and most of the dialogue is exactly the same. In fact, I'm pretty certain that almost every single line in the movie is like word for word from the book. It's
Well,
just the book has a few more lines dedicated to this, like this aspect of the story, the like celebrity crashes. They mention it more times, but like it's generally the same thing. It's the
very
same
cool.
gist. There's more scenes where Vaughn visits Ballard at his TV station, but again, in most of those scenes are just like, I was at work, Vaughn showed up, he was
Yeah.
asked to leave and he wouldn't,
Oh,
and then the
it
scene moves
starts a
on.
lot like a Brian De Palma like erotic thriller, but takes maybe 15 minutes for the film to get like more complicated than my homeboy De
Yeah,
Palma could ever dream to be. But it starts off
yeah,
very body double, very like I'm fucking my Asian secretary on a desk right now after my wife.
yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
very much like, okay, okay, dude. I get it. You have sex, Cronenberg. But very quickly it goes, you don't. Okay. Is this film, is there any, let's talk about moral frameworks for a second, because I don't think that the
Is there
film
such a
condemns
thing
these
here?
actions. Well, not usually, unless it comes to like girl boss serial killers, and apparently I will defend them until I die. Nancy from The Craft, watch my video about it. Link now. You like YouTube film criticism? That's how it is. It's so good. But moral frameworks, because we kind of touched on it earlier, and I think we both agree that the film doesn't actually condemn these actions. And I think in the universe of the film, that they're completely justified in most of what they do.
I feel kind of self-conscious about this, but I kind of also still stand by it. Like my initial, I like wrote a little review and put it online at some point. And I think I did it a second time actually, where I heavily imply that what they're doing in this movie is totally logical to me. Like
Yes.
it's like totally not only logical, but like holy shit, like of course, why would you not? And like I'm like I've had to reel that back a bit because like I'm not an idiot, and I'm like I was trying. This is TMI, but I actually talked about this movie in therapy at one point. I was like, I have to be clear. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, but
I'm
you'd
not
have
going
to
to.
be dishonest if you went like, yeah, there's a reason why like bikini models are normally positioned on hot rods or on like badass like cars. Like there's a reason why sex has always been attached to motor vehicles. There
Yeah,
has to be, right?
it's it's this mix of like I relate so intensely to the disaffection they feel in this movie, all the characters,
Hmm.
like everything they feel in this movie is so tangible to me. It's so intensely salient to me, to the point that I feel like there's a lot of this movie where I'm like, I feel like I've lived through this for years of my life. And so watching them just say, fuck it, and like
Yeah.
just initiate this shift that embraces change. And obviously
Yeah. But here's
I
where it
I
gets
am.
really interesting. Yeah, is that um that's the thing. We've talked about like nihilism in postmodern movies a lot, but is this nihilism? Because it looks like they
Yes.
finally have meaning for the first time, though. Like they finally have a united cause, a united like religious symbol. It feels like the antidote to nihilism.
I
Actually.
I have treated it as an antidote because again, I've watched this as like
Yeah.
a coping
But, like,
mechanism,
it looks
much
like
to
their
my
lives were
chagrin.
meaningless and hedonistic like, there's something about the event of the car crash and their attraction to cars that made it completely different. You still with me?
Yeah, no, I never lost you. I was okay.
Alright, I was talking to Lou Reed for a second, but,
No,
um,
it's okay. I accidentally hit the back button, so I just went back and I just clicked back on.
totally
It's all good.
cool because I don't know, like,
I
self-destruction obviously is not, like, not, like, exclusive to nihilism at all. At
I
all. Like, most religions of the world would argue with that. Most religions would almost, like, not martyrdom, but a form of self-destruction through, like,
yeah,
self-realization as part of, like, religion.
one of my yeah, one of my I am a big fan of a sort of a weird like Christian Muslim band, and one of my favorite lyrics of theirs is like, "Why not be utterly changed into fire?" Which is I think is a religious reference. Like, why would you not want that? Eh, I will say, and again, like I have absolutely treated this as an antidote to depression. I have been like very inspired by this movie. Obviously, Cronenberg and obviously, I'm not a gender conforming individual, so like this whole narrative of like you feel like shit and then you transform yourself is very personal to me, but also I find the ending so utterly pathetic. Because to some extent, I guess it's open ended, but I find Vaughn is really the only one that gets out of this okay, which is funny because he dies in like a really horrific, violent way that gets a lot of people killed. But it's what he wanted in a weird way. Like he gets the conclusion he was looking for, and the people that are left behind are exactly that. They're the people that are left behind. You know, they're just reinstigating the same technique for feeling in control of their lives over and over and over again, and they never feel complete because of it. They just kind of keep feeling the same way until it becomes routine, and I find that extremely depressing.
Mhm.
That conclusion, like that last shot, is just despairing to me. um
True.
it, it, rem- it reminds me of like I think the end of La Ventura, where Monica Vitti just seems so
Yeah.
barren. Yeah, you know, like she's just lost something and it's really just gone. um and I feel that a
Yeah.
lot while watching Crash, and yet at the same time I find myself so hyped up and inspired and like jazzed up to actually make a difference in my life while watching it. So I guess I'll take what I can get, but
Yeah, well, like, the issues are, a lot of the times Antonioni is saying that, like, the modern world has abused one of, like, the most precious or sacred parts of it, which is, like, the inherent beauty of Monica Vitti. There's nothing inherently beautiful about the universe that Crash gives us. And I mean,
no,
Cronenberg is like, we have unreliable narrators sometimes. He's the most unreliable director of all time.
yeah,
Like, I was just thinking, like,
100%.
of, like, moral frameworks applied to any of his films don't work in the traditional sense, not really.
I
Um,
think a lot of Cosmopolis in that regard, because the
yes.
the protagonist is such a deplorable individual,
Or
and the
even
narrative is basically
Videodrome,
the arc of his own like suicide. Yeah,
yeah,
Videodrome too.
if we're talking about, like, transcendence and, like, through the new flesh, through self-destruction and becoming
Yeah,
something different, something new. Uh,
yeah,
Cronenberg, well, that's how you make a good horror film, right? And I would actually call Crash a horror film for
I
sure.
agree.
Because you
I
have to come
agree.
to some horrific conclusions, and you have to engage with some pretty devastating things about the world and probably about yourself, and Cronenberg forces you to. If he doesn't get you with certain things, there are parts, like, I'm gonna say the word undeniable again, there's something that's undeniable about the pornographic reaction these characters have to the near-death experiences, and, certain things are undeniably sexy too, and dangerous at the same time. In fact, danger implies sexiness and vice versa, for sure.
Yeah, which
Um
is so common in his work,
Yeah,
pretty much.
yeah, it's, like,
But it kind
everywhere.
of finds its culmination here, and I guess M Butterfly if you shoot for that. But
Yeah. Like, anybody who tells me that, like, just shoving your head into Debbie Harry's fucking lips on a TV screen isn't, like, the hottest thing ever, I'm a okay, okay, buddy. Like, stop trying so hard. Like,
I would say on most of his movies can easily be classified as either a horror film or a romance film,
Right.
and
Well, there you
I want
go.
to use the word romance in like the most like early 2000s never been kissed sense of the word. Like,
Well, it would be like the pessimistic idea that, like, romance would also imply horror and vice versa, but it's actually the
yeah,
optimistic view because it's even more meaningful.
yeah.
Like,
I
it's not only, like, life-changing, it's life-ending.
it, there is this like recurring thing that I've never thought about until literally the second, in his work about like people trying desperately to like find love with other people, and then it'll or kind of attain this inner peace. Because in Cosmopolis, it's not really love; it's more just he's trying to find the peace he felt when he was a child again. But like, you know what I mean? Like M Butterfly, it's a romance. Scanners, it's kind of a romance. Dead Ringers, it's sort of an incestuous romance. And it always just kind of ends in self-immolation
Yes.
because they realize they can't actually connect with other people, but like they're desperately trying. You know, like James Spader and Unger, they're literally married and they seem like complete strangers to each other in like a very eyes wide shut kind of way. It's very
Oh
depressing.
god. Nicole Kidman would have done this amazingly too. Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, spot on. Tom
And maybe it's
Cruise,
just because it's
I
also
wish
another one
would
of my
die in a
favorite
car
movies,
accident.
but fair enough. Maybe it's because it's another one of my favorite movies, but I also think of this in relation to Eyes Wide Shut. My my
Yeah.
my girlfriend has joked that all my favorite movies are either about like weird sex shit or God, and there's no
Well,
in
I would
between.
say that Eyes Wide Shut is unquestionably the moral framework is nihilism. That's a nihilistic movie to me personally.
Yeah,
We can get into it,
I
but
might
Eyes Wide
agree.
Shut
I
is
might agree.
nihilistic. Crash, Crash, I think is so full of meaning
I
that you can feel like tangible
it's
meaning.
I guess what it is more that in Crash, the character's outlook is just nihilism. But
I
I
don't
don't
even
know
think
if
that
that's the
though. I think it's
movie's
religious.
outlook. Well, I mean like not kind of like a radical liberatory nihilism, like
It
in like a George Bataille kind of way,
it is radical, but it's not like pointless radicalism, right? Like it's radicalism that's reasonable given
I,
the condition that Cronenberg presents to us.
I'm mixed on this because I think the general like motivating forces for them are so insanely reasonable. And then I think the ending kind of leaves it unclear if they did what they should have done to confront that. Although on the other hand, the question then becomes like, what if there is no solution to this problem? And if there is no solution to this problem, maybe they did do the maybe that is the only reasonable thing
That
you can
that could
do.
be it for sure. I mean, if there's anything I can say about the ending is that it's cinematic and that Vaughn was right
Yeah.
about the filmic consequences of these kinds of sexual urges, then
Yeah.
like looks
It's
like it was right.
yeah, I guess that's what it is for me is that it's like the movie doesn't really make it clear if this is the only option, and the characters never stop to ask themselves if this is the only option. But there's a possibility it is the only option, so you have to accept the possibility that they may have just been right the whole time.
I think in that universe it is undeniable. Like
Yeah, yeah,
James Spader has that interiority, and I do feel like he is having an inner monologue that we're not allowed to hear of like, wait, why am I
oh,
feeling this way, dude?
i
Like,
I always feel like I like I'm forgetting there's a narration when I look
whoa.
back at it, and then I watch and I remember that there it's not actually there. It's just purely in my head in like a
Yeah,
Mandela effect
but
kind of
because
way.
he has so much interiority that you can hear what he's saying, even though he's not saying anything. Like
Yeah,
he is questioning it. It's just he's coming to an
yeah,
undeniable conclusion. And that
yeah.
it's inarguable. And but I feel like he's definitely has the tools. He's a capable character mentally to sort this out. And he's definitely
He
thinking about it.
he's definitely like I might argue the closest to sane of all of
Yes.
them.
Yes.
Only insofar as like his fascination seems to be like that of someone who is like so intelligent and a very rationally minded person who just says, "What if they're right?
Yeah.
What if?" You know, like he's like genuinely giving the time of day to this like backlot Jesus who's selling him something, and he's like, "What if this guy is right? What if he is in fact right?" And he really gives it serious thought, which is why I think the movie feels so like kind of cold and analytic. Is because
Yeah.
that's how he's perceiving these things in a very cold and analytic way. Like he's genuinely giving it philosophical thought to what he's being presented with, and I find that fascinating. And I don't know. We've
It's like, what are
seen
you
real,
supposed to do when you were supposed to die? But then again, what
yeah,
if you were supposed to never live in the first place?
yeah, which there's real life
Which
analogs to
sounds
this.
nihilistic, but it's not. Trust me, it's not
Well,
nihilistic. I
we're
don't think it is.
well, like my there's real life analogs to this, and I think those guys, a lot of those guys are insane.
Yes,
Like
yes.
Nick Land. Nick Land's a psychopath who's insanely racist, but he's also a very well regarded philosopher. So take what you can get. Who did a shit ton of drugs at the college he taught at and sold them to his students, but then he also wrote books that people still write about today.
Well, the thing is, like,
Who
how
is that
they brought up
mindset?
like Kubrick, and like one of the first things I think of with that movie is class, is elitist
Yeah,
abuse, right?
yeah.
Crash transcends class. Like,
Oh, yeah. The When I first got hyped up on Red Desert, I had just recently, this is another deep cut to make myself look bougie. I had recently read a book I was gifted. It was by a Japanese like Buddhist philosopher who was taught in the West. So he's like well versed in like Western philosophy, and so he was writing a book where he was trying to make a meeting ground so that Buddhism would make sense to Westerners, basically. So he was basically like, this is the common ground that exists between Buddhism and like Christianity or just general Western philosophy and stuff like that. And that was where I was first introduced to like this Buddhist thing he talks about, where it's this kind of plane of nothingness, just like under reality, that we're not really put in touch with until a traumatic event takes place.
right,
And I thought of that a lot while watching Red Desert, because the whole thing is that Red Desert, like a lot of Antonioni movies, has all these analogs to like class and material issues. Like people have claimed him as like a Marxist director, I feel like, but then you watch Red Desert and you realize like what she's feeling is deeper, like
yes,
it's like she
yeah.
she 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 hits something like below the bedrock, below the crust of the earth, that she just cannot explain. And so you're like presented with all these, like it's economic, it's material, it's class, and it's like it goes even deeper. She like hits something like almost satanic, like beneath existence, that you just cannot explain. And I get that a lot out of Crash. It's just like, because there's a lot of talk about like modernity, but he tells you it's about the transformation of the body by modern technology. Fair game. That sounds like a critique of capitalism. But then later he's like, honestly, I was full of shit. I made that up. I didn't mean it. He admits that it's not really what it
Yeah.
is. He admits that it's something more than that, that he can't like explain, and that he uses that explanation so that it's easier to process. It's really wires my head. Um,
Oh,
it's
it's great.
it's that's why I think of this as a religious film, is that like it really
I
just taps
agree.
into something outside of just like reality. It really hits me in a weird way, as you can see. I've been talking about this for like 90 minutes, and in the past I've talked about this for like 2.5 years. So I'm still talking about this fucking movie. I don't know what it is. I haven't been this like hyped up about, like this obsessed with the text in like almost a decade. It's really fascinating to me. I don't know. I keep getting new stuff out of it every time I think about it, which is funny because I feel like a lot of people approach it as like you watch it once and you're like, I get it. I get the general gist, sex, death, cars. I get it.
I think that Crash is so exhaustive that I hadn't seen it until you supplied me with it in over 10 years, and I don't need to see it for another 10. Not because it's not beautiful. It is beautiful. It's so exhaustive though, and I'm glad that it helped you, but I can also see it destroying someone.
Yeah, no, it might destroy me. Well, I've
We'll
got time
see.
left on Earth. I'm not dead yet, so I fully expect this movie to ruin my life. But
I just
I
definitely don't need to watch it after one of those like drunk nights striking out at the bar. I don't need to watch it then. There are
I
situations where that wouldn't help.
this is why I was joking for a while that because of like my reaction to Crash, I was like, I'm gonna see Crimes of the Future in theater and I'm gonna walk out of that place just not okay. Like I'm just something's gonna trigger and I'm gonna go full Joker mode. I'm just gonna go full Joker. I'm gonna walk out of that place with a fat ass and clown makeup. I will not be okay. I was
Oh man.
but that didn't happen. But I'm fully expecting Cronenberg has another one like that in him, or I hope he does. But again, I feel like Crash was like this culmination point where like everything he did across the 70s, 80s, and early 90s was building up to Crash. And then
Mhm.
he did Crash, and then he was like, guess I gotta do Cosmopolis. And like,
Yeah,
you
everything
know,
else is a coda, is like an appendix, everything
it
else
feels like he's
is
just experimenting. Like
yes.
in a way it's admirable because it feels like he's a much more free artist because he's not on a mission anymore. And so he's free to just kind of explore. And that's how we got great stuff like History of Violence, which
Yeah,
I
he's just
love.
on joy rides now. It's
Yeah, he can
just
do whatever he wants. He can philosophize about whatever he wants.
yeah.
He hit the finish line, you know what I mean? Like it Crash is like the kind of movie that most directors make when they're like 80. It's like you know, like Countess from Hong Kong. It's like the what you were ending with. But then he was only in his what, like 40s or 50s when he made it, so he had to keep going. But
Man. I'm glad
I
you brought it
definitely
to us. I'm glad you brought it here. Do you have anything else to say about it?
yeah, I'm really glad it won Best Picture. I'm glad racism is dead. I
I love that we went like the whole thing without bringing up,
making the
because that's
joke.
normally what everyone does first. Making the joke about the
If it helps, even Cronenberg himself did. I've seen interviews where he makes a gag about it, and everyone's like,
if it
For the
makes
record,
any
he almost didn't make this.
Crash, that the racist one is nihilistic, okay?
Oh,
That one is
100%, insanely
100%
nihilistic.
nihilism.
Um, a fun fact: he almost didn't make this movie.
Hmm.
Someone read the book of the producer for the film, I think, and then gave it to him, and he said, "Check this out." And so he's like, "I read about 20 pages," and I said, "Go suck a dick." Like he was like, "No, I'm not. This is horrible." Like not horrible, and like he thought it was a bad book, but horrible, and like he's like, "This is terrifying." Like they're talking about bodies like it's machines. Like it gave him an existential crisis. It sounded like it freaked him out, and he was like, "I don't think I can do this." But then he was like, a while later, he picked the book back up and read a bit more, and then he called him. Was like, I'll do it. I'll do it. Like it finally got to him, but he almost didn't make it because he was just like really put off by the audacity of it. And I can understand that. Like the movie is one thing, but I cannot imagine reading this book with no context
Oh no, not at all.
because the opening is like actually like pretty morbid. He it's the character Ballard like fantasizing about different ways people can die in car accidents, and he talks about, I think, like something like he's imagining like a child getting crushed by a seed and like people dying, and he's like having all these weird fantasies. It's really dark. So actually I think the book is a little darker than the movie, if you can believe it. It's
I can
really
believe it.
really hostile, but which is funny because you look at a picture of Ballard and he's like the most British looking man of all time. He looks just totally normal. You're like, oh, what a sweet old man. I wonder what he's doing.
Oh
Threading this
man.
shit.
Thank you for watching the video, everybody.